I would argue that the Orks are the least disliked faction in all of 40k. Sure, as with every other faction, they've got their big fans, those who are always with them 110%, but I don't think I've talked to anyone who's looked me in the eyes and said, I don't like the Orks. I mean, how can ya? They're big, mean, green, and a whole lot of fun. It's practically the only reason they're part of this great setting we call Warhammer 40k. To have a good time. But even with such simple motivations, and even if you have the room temperature IQ needed to be considered smart for an Ork, you're still just smart enough to know that someone's gotta be in charge. If for no other reason that someone has to be smart enough to guide everyone to a fight, there's gotta be an Ork in charge to get everyone together and throw them at the closest scrap. Sometimes a warboss is a real hidden gem of intelligence. Not smart, but almost approaching human average, which for Orks is next level. Sometimes they're as dumb as a shipping container, but also the size of one, so it just doesn't matter. Biggest guy's in charge, do what he says. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, we get a real banger of an Ork. One who's actually smart by human standards, is the size of a school bus, and has just enough patience to achieve that most rare of Ork skills: logistical analysis. All of these and more are what Warbosses are capable of, and in the spirit of Orktober, why don't we take a nice broad look at Warbosses, the boys that do the best. But before we talk shop about war and its many hammers, consider the following. Cereal. But not just any cereal, no. Magic Spoon, the sponsor of this video. I've said it before, but since it's still true, I'll say it again. I love cereal, but cereal doesn't love me. It's like reverse insulin. One bite and suddenly my blood sugar's in the stratosphere. But Magic Spoon cereal is on my level and knows how to treat me right. With 0 grams of sugar, it isn't giving me the blood sugar suplex every time I have some. And with 13 to 14 grams of protein and 4 to 5 net grams of carbs in each serving, it'll be healthy even for those of us who aren't pancreatically impaired. And it just plain and simple tastes good, which for food is the highest praise you can give it in my opinion. Do you like chocolate, cinnamon, or fruity flavored cereal? Well, luckily for you, Magic Spoon has you covered. Those and more are some of the wonderful cereals Magic Spoon has to offer. And as you can see from the footage of me wolfing it down, I'm personally a big fan of the flavors to be had here. But don't just take my word for it, take Magic Spoon's. Online orders have a 100% happiness guarantee. If you don't like it, you'll get your money refunded with no questions asked. If that doesn't speak to the confidence they have in the taste of their cereal, I don't know what does. And as a nice little bonus just for you, here's a deal. Use my code Pancreas or click the link in the description to try Magic Spoon cereal or treats today and get $5 off. You can also find Magic Spoon on Amazon or in your nearest grocery store. Cereal is the best way to start your day, and there's no better cereal than Magic Spoon, so try some now and make your mornings that much better. Now then, wah. Ork Warbosses are pretty self-explanatory in all ways. They're the boss of the war. There's technically 3 ways that an enterprising Ork becomes a warboss. 2 if we're being honest, because options 1 and 2 are the same, only in option 2 you skip some steps. Option 1. A boy slowly rises up the ranks. He's a standard boy for some time, has his hobbies and preferences for war, whatever they may be. He survives enough fights, gets big enough from it, and now we get a knob. Maybe he'll become wealthy and powerful enough to afford some mega knob armor, but it's not necessary. And then comes the day when he challenges the warboss for his title, which is naturally to the death in pretty much every single case. Theoretically doesn't have to happen, but these are Orks. It's usually to the death. The technically different route is if this particular boy is just born into the world swinging right out of the gate. Theoretically, at any point, an Ork can challenge a warboss. It's just that if he isn't a knob at least, he's probably going to get rocked. If you would like some conjecture on my part, this is how you get the more cunning warbosses. Most Orks probably aren't going to be big enough early on in their lives to fight the warboss head-on, so they gotta be a bit more cunning than brutal. Even in these cases, though, the new warboss will get bigger over time, so eventually they'll quite literally grow into the role. And option 3 is that if the warboss gets killed by outside forces, someone gets to take his place. This usually works by the biggest knob beating everyone else up until he takes the role, although once again it is more or less up to anyone bold enough to claim the position. More cunning boys might even go so far as to convince the boss to fight an enemy he surely doesn't have a chance against so they can take his place. Really, as much as I called it simple, there's any number of ways a boy can become the warboss. The broad strokes will be the same across the galaxy, but you know what they say, the devil's in the details. This can include a headbutting contest until one of the contestants passes out or dies of brain trauma, which is very fun. Successful enough warbosses sometimes also take the title of warlord. Sure enough, an Ork warlord is just an Ork warboss, but over more tribes. A warboss leads a tribe, but a warlord can lead a system's worth of Orks. Really though, same thing, just in charge of more orcs. Once in charge, they'll oftentimes change the way the tribe fights to be of their choosing if it's the case where a tribe has multiple different types of orcs, or the warboss was from a different group. Usually orcs of a tribe will be of similar clans, but if for example a Flashgitz orc takes over some snake bites, then those boys might forcibly learn an appreciation for outlandishly decked out weapons. Regardless of any personal feelings an orc might have, they'll go along with it for the most part. What the boss says goes after all, since he's the boss. As I said before, warbosses can come in all sorts of varieties. All of them of course are going to kick ass in a fight, but just how they kick ass is as varied as the orcs are. Some of them are just dumb as bricks. All they got is their muscle and weapons, but they're covered in armor meant for vehicles and the size of a truck, so it doesn't matter. You don't need to be smart when you can tank las cannon shots to the face. Some of them are cunning, smart enough to attack from the side, which is quite the tactical feat for the greenskins. Underestimating an orc warboss or assuming victory against a prior warboss will lead you to victory against the next one is a great way to get your shit rocked. Admiral Spire says as much in Battlefleet Gothic. And yeah, that's about space battles, but the same principle applies. Now the rest of the video won't be too in-depth on any one warboss in particular. I feel it's very fitting to orc culture that way. They don't care about specifics, so at the moment, I won't either. Instead, with some valued help, I'll be going over a little bit about some of the standouts in the field of orc leadership. This allows me to not only get away with surface-level writing and pretend it's acceptable, but also to gauge interest for future videos. Answer me this, viewer, if I'm telling you outright this is so I can pick which topics earn me the most internet views and money in the future, is it still a scam? So naturally for an orc video, let's start with the biggest and baddest one of them all, Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka. Fun fact, he's not actually named after Margaret Thatcher. Also fun fact, with a name like that, I can't blame anyone for calling him Margaret Thatcher. And with that being said, one of his nicknames is the Iron Orc, so call it a draw, I guess. Early on in Gaz's life, he wasn't particularly interesting by orc standards, just a boy, one of many. Then some dark angels shot him in the head, which tore out most of his skull and brain, but luckily there was still some hope in the form of Mad Doc Grotznick. After getting some metal bolted onto his brain, he was apparently gifted the power of schizophrenia, because he started getting visions from Gork and Mork themselves. When some solar flares started wreaking havoc on the planet his Boyz was on, the voices in his head told him to hijack the Space Hulk that was conveniently in the sector at the same time. While there was some engine difficulty while in the warp, this is only a problem if you don't like fighting demons, which orcs very much do. Thanks to some meddling from everyone's favorite Farseer, Eldrad, he was sent off course from the craft world he was originally headed towards in favor of a little-known planet called Armageddon. This small act of Eldar dickery started some of the largest wars the Imperium has ever seen, so that's a fat Gazi dub if I've ever heard of one. His power and influence only grew more and more, gathering more orcs under his banner. Now there's barely an orc in the galaxy, under his control or not, that isn't aware of Gazi's prowess as a warboss. His main nemesis is/was, of course, Commissar Yarrick, who unfortunately is probably a bit dead, but if the biggest orc in the galaxy says you're a good fight, then you were probably a good fight. For a while it was also Ragnar Blackmane, who cut off Ghazghkull's head. This is further proof that GW religiously follows the phrase, only a Primarch can kill another Primarch, because of course a Xenos character built to be a Primarch-scale threat can be beheaded by some random bozo. Gazi got better though, he just had his head popped onto another body and all was good. Thank you, Grotznick. And yes, I'm aware Konrad Kurz was killed by Immortal. He let it happen. Doesn't count. Gazi wants what any orc wants. A big fight. But not just any fight. No, no, no. He wants the big fight. The biggest fight ever, where all the orcs unite and sweep across the galaxy in a tide of green. And he's done a pretty good job at getting it going so far. Sure, not every orc explicitly listens to him, but that's usually resolved by him showing up somewhere and going, eyes to boss now. And if that doesn't work, beating the snotlings out of the local boss sure does. While out of universe, we know it will never happen until GW is finally failing for real and we get N times 40k. In universe, this is only a matter of time. Eternally accompanying him is his little grot buddy Makari. Makari carries his flag, is all around a grot, so not really worth much notice ever, but he's got one crucial thing going for him. He's a lucky son of a bitch. So lucky, he's got a 2-up invuln save. Now, Makari has died before, so this might in theory just be a series of grots Gaz names Makari so they can hold his banner. But I like to think through extreme comedic circumstances, Makari continues on as he was from the start. One absurdly lucky grot who just can't be put down no matter how many times Gaz accidentally sits on him. Now, Gaz is the biggest warboss in the universe, but have you considered looking outside of the universe for bigger ones? Because in 40k, that's a valid thing to do. Let me tell you a story. Once upon a time, before Cadia got Alderaan, there was a slight issue. a massive group of orcs, you see, decided to invade the system. Strangely, however, they attacked the planet of Prozan. Now, Prozan was a rock with absolutely no value to even the orcs. Its only purpose was as a training ground for Cadians. But the orcs must have wanted it because they slammed into it full force, so the Imperium dutifully responded and did their best to defend the planet. The regiments there held them off valiantly, but if the orcs stuck around any longer, they would surely be overwhelmed. To the relief and confusion of all present, however, the Greenskins just picked up and left not long after. Because as it turns out, this band of orcs was using the single most heavily defended system in the entire Imperium, bar maybe the Sol system, as a warm-up. Meet Tuska Demon Killer. Tuska was once just a regular orc war boss when some demons invaded the space hulk he was on. After swiftly dealing with the extra-dimensional threat, who found out they bit off way more than they could chew, he decided demons were the best fight he'd ever had. So he told his boys to get ready because after a short detour through the Cadian Gate, it was off to the Eye of Terror with them. And despite what you might think, early on it was very successful for him. He plowed through a decent few worlds before finally meeting his match on a Khornate one, and honestly, I bet money on him at least slowing down the progress on Abaddon's next crusade. And since it was a Khorne world, Big K was loving all the violence and decided to resurrect Tusken and his boys at the foot of his brass citadel at the end of every day. At the heart of Khorne's realm lies a never-ending battle of green versus red, and if you wouldn't mind some further conjecture, consider that as orcs fight, they get bigger. And with how time works in the warp, Tusken and his boys might have been in there for millions of years, constantly fighting, constantly getting stronger. Now imagine setting them loose on the galaxy. It will never happen because then the Krorks come back, but it'd be fun to watch. Now listen everyone, I'm the elf expert. You want someone to go on about how Eldrad could body Magnus, or how I'd trade my soul for a whiff of Morathi's elbow sweat? I'm your guy. But I'm a bit less versed in orc lore, so I thought I'd bring in some help. And what better help than the premier orc YouTuber? Glimgam Glitzdaka. Christ. Mr. Glitzdaka, it's your time to shine.
Huh? What? Who's that? Oh, I know you. You's just that one sogger that goes on about the scrawnies all the time, right? What was your name? PancreasNoWork is right. Well then, Mr. Pancakes, what do you want?
Please help me talk about orcs, me no know them.
Oh, I see. You's just forty talking about the best bosses in the galaxy, eh? Oh, come on, tell me, what you think about Nazdrag Urgrub?
I have no idea who that is.
You what? How could yous not? What about Uftak Blackhawk, Gargaz Teef Crabber, Mega Admiral Snaz Talker, Boss Golguts, Big McMogrot? You tell me that you hasn't had any of the Bad Moon's bosses to talk about yet? What the zog is wrong with you? Taze is like the most prolific of all the clans these days. Alright, Mr. Pancakes, you and all you kids watching sit down and let a real orky YouTuber tells you what Bad Moons is best. Now, firstly, you kids needs to learn about the oldest of the big Bad Moon's bosses, Nazdrag Urgrub. This kid's been around since the second edition of that big book of rules thing that all you kids play your game with. And these could have been even bigger than the Prophet if they gave a song about starting a big war. But Nazdrag lived the true yellow-pilled orc life of pirating. Not like a freeboot of mine, because freebooters works with other non-orky gits. No, Nazdrag was a Bad Moon through and through. Looting from world to world like the Bestest Sector, Medusa 5, the Third War of Armageddon and even fighting that fish boy Farsight in the War of Docker. You know, the best kind of war. But you see, it's not their ability to smash that keeps them alive and strong and crumping, right? Nazdrag is cunning. This is what makes them the biggest potential threat aside from the Prophet. See, Nazdrag and their big mechs specialized in teleporter technology and got better and better with it over time. To a point where Nazdrag was working on a super weapon called the Telefragger. See, normally teleporting technology is all about getting you from one place to the other really fast, right? Well, the Telefragger was a big Zogan gun that used teleporting and bubble field technology to split apart whatever it was pointing at and then send them pieces to Zog knows where. Raw killy stuff, eh? But Nazdrag didn't stop there. See, in every fight that kit was in, Nazdrag was able to teleport back to the warp with such ease that you'd think that Gork and Mork were personally showing them the way. Now that's some good brutal and cunning right there, And that was from our Bad Moons boss. But now we got this new boss rising up the ranks to be a right and proper threat to even the Prophet himself. Ulftek Gargant Smasher Blackhawk. And I got a bit of a two-mind about when it comes to this Bad Moons boss. For one, this skit is right big and right killy. Like, this skit was so cunning that they was able to take down an Umi Warlord Titan with nothing more than themselves, their sidekick Ork, a Squig, a Grot, and a questionably constructed shock jump dragster. And according to all the books about him, Ulftek is so big that they single-handedly crumped their old boss, the Macleod, and took over the biggest war in the sector for himself. And if the books is to be believed, Ulftek is almost as big as, if not bigger than, the Prophet himself. But see, on the other hand, I can't help but feel like Ulftek just got really, really lucky. Like, for one, the only reason they was able to become a knob in the first place was because Ulftek got their head transplanted to their old knob's body. A bit cheating if you ask me. And the only reason why Ulftek is as big and cunning as they is now is because they got juiced up by some Sparky's poison that makes muscle grow and grow till yous explode. But Ulftek, he didn't explode. They just got really big. And finally, Ulftek's got no appreciation for proper good Docker. Instead, they only seems to fight with their snazhammer, which, yeah, that's raw killy right there. But if you can't appreciate Docker, then is you really a bad moon? Cause spoiler alert, Ulftek's last book, Big Docker, didn't have no sogging Big Docker in it to the last chapter of the book. But whatever. Dey Iz is a bad moon boss so big they could take on Gazgul, and that's good enough for me, I think. So, Mr. Pancakes, now that you and your viewers are properly educated with Bad Moon's bosses, what else do you got to talk about?
Wasn't that enlightening? Sometimes you just gotta call on the people who actually care about a subject to do it justice, and I don't think anyone likes orcs more in 40k more than he does. Anyways, back on my rather considerably less energetic end of things, we've our next boss, Wazdaka Gutsmack. Another fun name to say. He's a pretty simple one, all things considered, but all the more fun for it. While everyone knows orcs love fighting and shooting, they also love to go fast, and Wazdaka is the premier go-fast orc. Once just a humble evil son's mech boy, he discovered he really liked what the Cult of Speed had to say about things. So he kept tricking out his bike, got accused by other orcs of cheating in a race, which he responded to by glassing the entire tribe, and rode off into the sunset and across the stars. Unless his bike needs fixing, he never gets off it, and it's worth noting that this bike is called the Bike of the Apocalypse. At one point he single-handedly destroyed a titan and stole the skull of the Princeps to put it on top of his bike. He's launched a speed wah so intense that it's cutting directly through the segmentum solar on a crash course towards Terra. Now this might get me yelled at, but if there's anyone other than the clowns that could take on the Custodes, I'd say it's this guy, if only because of simple physics. When you go fast enough, it doesn't really matter if your enemy is a guardsman or the ultimate result of the Emperor's knowledge. The end result is still a red stain on the ground. Across the galaxy, speed freaks regard him as an absolute legend, and by God, I hope that he kicks off the end times by drunk driving directly into the Imperial Palace, or a local Scala. After this guy, we have Gruk Face Rippa. He got his name by ripping the face off of the original warboss of his band and taking his place. I love orc names, they tell you exactly what you're in for. Among his accolades, he's first off killed a squad of space marines before they could get out of their drop pod, which was admittedly malfunctioning, but I'd argue that's more impressive because he ripped the damn thing open to get to them. He followed it up by slaughtering an entire space marine chapter, including the chapter master in a duel, and all by his lonesome killed 2 Imperial Knights after diving onto them from atop a Stampa. He was briefly almost killed, but almost killed to orcs just means it'll take maybe a full day until they're back at it, and sure enough, once the boys found his body, he was patched up and proceeded to start assaulting some space wolves. Pretty simple guy, but he's now in my top 5 for no other reason than he's fighting the space wolves. Now for a real war boss, Gorgut's Edhunter. You can't say headhunter, you gotta say Edhunter. Gorguts is an amazing orc, for you see, he's perhaps the only redeeming quality of Dawn of War 3 aside from its soundtrack. Predictably, he gets his name from his habit of collecting skulls of the enemies he defeats, which he promptly adds to his pointy stick as he calls it. Gorgas was a part of Dawn of War for the same reason any orc is involved in a fight. It looked like it was a fun time. Being introduced in Winter Assault, he's the most fun character in the game, and is just as deadly when verbally fighting the enemies as he is when he's actually fighting them. Prior to the games, he was just another war boss that ended up rising to prominence and conquering other tribes. Some of this was just good old-fashioned brutality, but some cunning was displayed as well when he managed to let loose a bunch of another tribe's own squigoths to cause a rampage for him to take advantage of. Supposedly, he was an evil sun's lad, but in practice, he seems to change which clan he belongs to at the drop of a hat because holy shit, his behavior is all over the place. In fairness, he's a controllable hero in a strategy game with an upgrade system, so it's less annoying than if another orc was like this. And while this either won't be easy for you to swallow or worth mentioning, depending on how you feel about Soulstorm, he's the canonical victor of it. Karuva is now an orc empire, so sucks to suck, Blood Ravens. When he returned in Dawn of War 3, he was serving as the lieutenant to the local war boss, but again, he's an orc. For anyone else, this would be annoyingly inconsistent as to why a leader character is no longer a leader. For Gorguts, it's swiftly explained away by thinking that he just simply wanted to do what he wanted to do. He didn't want to initially be in charge anymore, so he wasn't. He took control with both violence and clever thinking anyways, so he's back on top after a bit of the game. He ends up working with the Blood Ravens and Eldar in order to defeat the Chaos forces present, and as an added bonus, grabs the Spear of Cain after everyone else agreed to leave it be. It's honestly really funny because him, Maka, and Angelos all walk away from it, but he just turns back around and grabs it. What the hell did the other two think was gonna happen? The orc was just gonna leave the god weapon alone? One final fun fact for you, in the original Dawn of War, he's voiced by Brian Drummond. You may not know who this is, but if you were a big fan of late 2000s meme culture, you sure as hell know who he voiced.
It's over 9,000!
Bet you didn't see that one coming. You wanna know what makes it better, though? You wanna guess who Kroll's voice actor was? Michael Dobson, aka...
What, 9,000? There's no way that can be right!
I'm just saying, if for some reason you're a die-hard Nappa fan, you can load up the original Dawn of War and give Vegeta what he deserves for that betrayal. Next in line is Boss Snickrot. Another quick character like most of the rest are. He's a good one. During the Second War for Armageddon, he was an orc so good at his job, even Ghazghkull himself thought he was a cool dude. Unfortunately, the guard always holds the line, so him and his boys were defeated, but he didn't let that stop him. Instead, he withdrew into the jungle, got rid of his armor, and learned how to be properly stealthy. So stealthy that he actually sneaks into guard camps with his followers undetected. Come the Third War for Armageddon, I think it's honestly fair to say that Snickrot is one of, if not the greatest threats to any patrolling guardsman on the planet. They sit down for the night, get the night watch going, and come 2 hours into the shift, all the sentries have their throats slit, and the explosions start only after the orcs have set the charges and left. He's terrifying. And because he's an orc, if you catch him, he'll just beat you to death the normal way. And even better, when Gaz left Armageddon for greener pastures, he decided he was staying behind until the world was not just under orc control, but his control. Ghazghkull be damned. And to make matters more brutal, he's a bit of an orc purist, or if you're feeling more judgmental, an orc racist. When demons started invading in such force that the orcs and humans actually started working together against them, Snickrot wasn't having any of this. So in addition to human soldiers, not even orcs guilty of the sin of tolerance were safe. Orcs caught working with humans were dragged into the darkness, the remains left as a warning to any other greenskins who thought they'd work with Umi Gitz. Armageddon may not be under his control yet, but at this rate, it's only a matter of time. After all, if that kind of thing worked for the Night Lords, it'll work for him sooner or later. Getting close to the end now, but still a few more to go. Mazrog Skargbad. Isn't that a fun name to say? You may not have heard of him, but you've almost certainly seen his model, because it's Squig Jaws, which is just fun. He was always a bit of a weirdo, that Mazrog, preferred squigs to hanging out with the boys. But because of this, in the background he had gained a reputation amongst the orcs for being amazing at handling beasts and for his immense hunting skills. At one point, him and the squig he was riding were eaten by a massive creature. With a good chunk of his body dissolved in stomach acid and his squig completely devoured, the poor beast that ate him never had a chance. The orcs back home were so impressed with his kill that they had him patched up with bionics, and he was back at it for his greatest challenge yet. Taming the great white squig. It's a great white shark that's a squig. That's the joke. That's it. Sometimes things don't need to be a great and epic story, they can just be fun. He chased it around for a few days and managed to sort of tame it. Sort of meaning if he gets off it, it goes feral again, until he gets back on and calms it down. True to the legend he's gathered, he's garnered a following of quite a few beast snaggers in his wake, and true to his personality, he doesn't care for any of them one way or the other as long as they don't get in his way. Not the most interesting of the characters here perhaps, but he rides a mushroom shark and so he is automatically one of the greatest characters in 40k. Another short and sweet warlord is Captain Badrick. Different kinds of orcs have different names for a war boss, and freebooters call theirs captains because piracy is funny. Badrick is real simple. He's got to be the greatest pirate you've ever seen. Once a bad moon, all the other orcs were apparently jealous of his Teef horde and he was exiled. In response, he became the greatest freebooter to ever live, defeating a tendril of Hive Fleet Kraken, somehow outshooting the Tau, and single-handedly defeating both Imperial Knights and Space Whales. Nowadays, he's assaulting the Space Wolves, with rumors that he's doing it on behalf of a secret benefactor with some serious power and money behind them. Who exactly it is unstated, but given the Space Wolves' habit of pissing off Imperial authority, I think we can safely assume the Inquisition is getting some payback via proxy. Almost done now, I swear, and here's a real quick one. Boss Zagstruck. Interestingly, he was born in a human settlement. Predictably, he slaughtered his way out to rejoin his tribe. In fact, if you'd like an even quicker summary of him than the segment already will be, take Grimgor Ironhide and give him a jetpack. He's even got a similar thing where he's rumored to have never gone a day without fighting, as well as a squad of storm boys he leads called the Vulture Boys. One time he was fighting a dreadnought which destroyed both of his legs. He then proceeded to climb onto it and rip out its core with nothing but his teeth. He replaced his legs with bionic ones that add to his considerable weight, helping him crush anything he lands on top of all the more effectively. Another time, a force from Craftworld Sime Han outmaneuvered him, as is fitting for the Wild Rider's prowess. Zagstruck did not take kindly to this and marched into the Webway. For most beings, this is suicide by elf magic. For Zagstruck, this was a few months of vacation that ended with him returning completely unscathed, covered in blood, and with several Eldar helmets dangling from his belt. This loss doesn't make me offended on behalf of the Eldar, that's just badass. Helps it was presumably some kind of ambush or something and not him assaulting Kamara, but I'll give credit where it's due, it's cool.
Hang on! That all the bosses you's got? You just forget about the best Bad Moon's war boss in my book, Gargaz Teef Grabber. This is the best Bad Moon's boss, if not all bosses, in the entire galaxy, cause this git crumped more by themselves, more than any other git in the galaxy. Or even that Captain Titus git. Boss Teef Grabber, in a valiant quest to get the air squeak back, successfully crumps the following. Let's see here. Ayumi Gunwagon, Ayumi Big Battle Wagon, an entire hive city of Ayumi bug things and a big psychical bug leader, a big slew of white speedy beakies, their chaplain, and their big dread, a giant Ayumi stomper with more darker than I can count, and finally, a right and proper orky stomper. He crumped all these things by themselves. Earning them to rider the war boss and leader the war Teef Grabber. What started off as protecting the snazzy air squig turned into the biggest one orc army demolition that the Umis ever saw. And unlike Uftek, Gargaz Teef Grabber has proper Bad Moon's appreciation for all orky darker. From shooters to sluggers to burners to squig mines, rocket launchers, death beams and boomsticks, there ain't a single kind of darker that Gargaz don't use. See this? This right here is a proper Bad Moon's boss, using the best darker to take down hundreds of Umis, tanks, walkers and more by themselves. So tell me, Mr. PancreasNoWork, do you know of a better boss that can do all that?
Well, with the inclinations I have to admit I'm a bit partial to Grimgor or Wurzag, but war bosses in 40k are cool, I can admit. But of course, thank you for coming on, Mr. Gimganglitzdaka, for the help, and I promise I will learn to properly say your name without rehearsing it several times beforehand first.
And thank you, Mr. PancreasNoWork, for having me on. Alright, you little kids, if yous wants to hear more about orcs, boy and orc, come over to me channel, Gimganglitzdaka. Oil's eyes is coming for yous.
And sure enough, there's the Orc Warbosses. Some real tough gits. They're big, mean, green, and you can find them as dumb or as smart as you want them to be. And of course, thank you to my wonderful channel members. You are the boys to my war boss, the lads keeping me going through thick and thin to greater and greater fights. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to subscribe or become a member. Either way, thank you for watching, and take care out there. Alright, unrelated to war bosses specifically, but let's go through something real quick. Orcs are mushrooms. They're a race of fungal spores that turn into madmen. Mushroom spores, and orc spores in particular, can grow on more or less anything. Probably including people. The orcs are also, while certainly not a hive mind proper, enhanced by a crowd mentality power. The more orcs, the more stronger the individual orc. So there is some collective stuff going on here. So my question is, what would happen if you strap a human to a chair and grow orc fungus on them? Uh-oh.